Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenMara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight, my phone's going off, that's cool, we'll shut that down. We are going on our continuing journey of myth and tarot, where we discuss a creature from mythology and do a tarot reading as if that creature was sitting in front of me, so that we can kind of see where their energy is, what's going on in the current moment, if they're still running around, which from my experience they might actually still be there, you never know. Anyhow, our creature tonight is one that I want to introduce you to, or maybe go a little bit deeper if you've never heard of them before. And it's getting into spooky season. So we're going to start looking at some of the things that go bump in the night. And tonight we are going to start off our journey into the shadows with the Wraith family or clan, depending on how you choose to look at them. By definition, a Wraith, according to Merriam-Webster, is the exact likeness of a person, usually just before death, as an apparition or ghost, or an insubstantial form or semblance, like a shadow person. Or the third meaning was a a barely visible gaseous or vaporous column, like, you know, when you watch those ghost hunting shows and they see that spooky mist off in like one picture. That's what you would classify a Wraith. Another term, judging by the Merriam-Webster definition, is the doppelganger. The term doppelganger is actually from the German language, and it means double goer, so it's a person's double. In an old superstition, to see your own double, like for you to be walking down the street and see someone who looks identical in every way to you, which would be really weird, I think, would also mean that your ending was imminent. Making sure I'm not getting in trouble with any of the platform, controllers here. The same could be said of Wraiths. If you see a Wraith who is your perfect double, the end is near, type of a thing. And a ghostly double of yourself basically meant that you were next on the passing over schedule. So the stories were mixed. Some people said within 24 hours. Other people said you had 3 days, 7 days. But to see your own double meant you were done. But what I found interesting, and I've heard about Wraiths, I've talked about them, I've watched them in movies. They're kind of everywhere, really, today. Well, especially if you like the old movies that I like. Anyway, the term Wraith isn't that old. It's only a few hundred years, to be honest with you. One of the first references that I could find, now this is not the oldest, but one of the first that I ran across, was in Virgil's, I never can say this right, Aeneid. The term Wraith was used as a term for a ghost of a living person, like their double, or a dead person. But that was it was a mess up in the translation, is where the term in that situation came from, because it's not an exact translation. So there's that. Sorry, I was having a soda before the stream. Shouldn't have done that. Anyway, some of the lore around the Wraith is actually pretty interesting. Some of the myths say that a Wraith is formed from a witch or wizard that messed up a spell used to lengthen life or adjust time so that they could make their life last longer, shorten time for somebody else. Basically, they said the wrong word, did something wrong, and it rebounded on them. So it slaps them instead. And what happens is the soul of that witch or wizard is stripped from the body. The body is destroyed, and the soul is just made to wander in the astral forever, never being able to go up into the light. They can't really go down into the depths, become demons of some form. So they just exist, but it's a very lonely lost existence. And they appear in our world as ethereal or ghostly images. That's where you get that transparent, almost glowing images that you see in the ghost hunting shows, which I do like, even if they're cheesy. It's a punishment for their arrogance, is one theory, that they can never reach heaven or Summerland or Valhalla, whichever term you want to use, and they can't be banished to the darkness, so they just are wandering in the kind of primordial ether. They just don't have a home, they just wander. They're basically lost for all eternity. Sounds pleasant. When a wraith is close, the temperature tends to drop dramatically. 65 down to 30 is not an uncommon occurrence when an actual wraith is coming through. They use the heat from the room, from you, from batteries, from these little devices here, to generate a physical form. They can't hold it for very long because of, they weren't allowed to stay here. They screwed up and got bounced. So that also means you don't get to be seen all the time. Wraiths, because of the separation of body and aspects of their soul, according to the one myth, but there's other myths that state that wraiths don't actually have a soul and didn't have one to begin with. And in this theory, this vein of belief, they are considered to be an evil entity, like a demon, basically, the bad kind, not the Greek spirit term. But it's not exactly true, because there's, again, more than one kind. These are wandering spirits we're talking about. They tend to the darkness because it feeds them. Some can actually be considered good or beneficial, helpful, however. And the old legends call the positive ones Voror. But according to the lore, they're very rare, but that doesn't mean they don't exist, and I'll explain a little bit more about those guys here in a few minutes. But we're gonna wander down a little bit of a dark path. And I don't have images, so don't worry. This is just your own imagination. Anyway, part of the dark lore around these beings is that with a touch, just a touch, they can steal a person's soul, making them a wraith as well, cursing that person to wander eternity with the original wraith. Okay, could be. Some wraiths are created with a mission to hunt down a person that wronged them. Usually in death, their urge for revenge is so strong, so powerful, it doesn't allow their soul to move on. Like, they can see the light over there, but they're like, I got stuff to take care of, so there's no way I'm leaving. And they end up prowling the night, seeking the person that wronged them. And a lot of the lore that I was reading around this, it wasn't just that they were wronged by, like, being cheated. It was wronged as in caused their untimely demise. So they would go after the person who offed them and fix this, readdress the balance, is kind of where they were going with this. There's other wraiths that exist outside of that aspect, who are seen specifically as dark. Excuse me. And these ones are seen as leeches, a psychic vampire, so to speak. And the people claim that they possess the victim. But when you read the references, it's not so much a possession, but a constant drain of energy. If it were a full possession, there would be symptoms, there would be omens, the person would lose control of themselves, and the wraith would take step forward and be able to actively manipulate the body. But that's not quite how things go. It is said that the person with this kind of wraith can actually develop the dark abilities. Didn't understand this, so I dug deeper. A wraith in this form that leeches, that psychically drains another person, cannot wield its own power. So when they were created weak, exceptionally weak. Their only tool that they have access to is being able to drain the life essence of another person or another being. And so once it attaches, they can't use their ability, but it's like there's a law of exchange that goes on, because the person that they're draining gains the abilities they're not allowed to use. So Wraith can't use fill-in-the-blank ability, but dinner can. Probably doesn't help the Wraith's personality much. There's even a myth about this type of Wraith being able to attach part of itself to a gestating baby in a womb, and this creates a dark child, or what was in the old times called a blood child. Couldn't find out a lot of research on that. Dig deeper at a later time if you guys are interested in that weird little twist of Wraiths. But these vampire types, in most cases, cannot exert control over any person. That's the reason that I don't see it as full possession. Full possession is you're able to control the other person. They kind of just attach and drain the person. They use the person's energy. It's not so much they use the body, they just drain off the field. Oddly enough, they enhance that person's abilities, which, like I said, I can't quite figure out, but I still think it's part of the law of exchange. They give up their energy. The person gives up the energy for the leech, the Wraith, to continue to exist, and the exchange back is that person gains the Wraith's dark abilities. Nature hates a vacuum, I guess. I just messed my notes up. Just one second. The other thing, sorry, that I found where I was at. The other thing that's interesting about the leech or psychic vampire type Wraith, in 90% of the time, you don't know that they have that attachment. You were really vibrant, you're still there, you're just a little bit less. And as you get older, you just assume that it's because you're, getting older. But there's a possibility that's one of these little critters. But there are ways to deal with it, and so we'll get into that as well. I'm not going to just take you into the dark and be like, there you go. We'll discuss other options as we go along here. But we'll stay on our dark little path for a moment. If you see a Wraith as a double, it's not very comforting, because it's never a good sign to see your own double. But if you just see a wandering Wraith, like a spirit out there doing its thing out in the woods on the edge of a forest, because they like gateways, which are the crossover events. Crossroads are another good spot to see them. It can appear just as a black cloaked figure. Very skeletal features, drawn in cheeks, sunken eyes if they even have them. Could just be a skull sitting on top of more bones. But it also, when you look into their little shrouded face, you may just see mist, a swirling void, nothing really there. I would recommend not looking into there, but if you happen to catch a glimpse, there you go. Wraiths can on occasion be very, very angry about being a Wraith, and that's what leads the darkness to grow and expand within them. And misery loves company, so these jackwagons are out there trying to make new friends. These are the Wraiths that are trying to touch you and take your soul out of your body because, well, I have to be this horrible thing, so do you. Grow up. Anyway, they can seem to be hard to deal with, but it's not always the case, because they hate anything light. They don't like the light side of existence. They live in the dark. Even the neutral ones don't like to be in the light. Holy icons were historically used to keep them at bay. Crosses, pentagrams, things along those lines. The presence of a holy person, interestingly enough, or a shaman, just a shaman in the village, will actually keep Wraiths from being in. Being around someone who is more spiritual-minded, a light worker, so to speak, will keep them out of their environment unless they are called in by someone who's on the darker side of life. So it's not always like they're just out there roaming around to catch you. They have to find someone who's already heading down a darker path to be able to attach properly. Legend has it that if you get rid of one, you don't just chase it away, you destroy it. You banish it back to the abyss where it can never return from, which in one case takes away their option to move up, not that they really have one, but you don't want to just chase it off, because then it'll be really pissed when it comes back a second time. And they will come back, so if you're going to toy with them, make sure you do it right the first time. So we're gonna wander out of the darkness for a moment now, just to kind of lighten the space, and that is a little less myth, a little more historical reference. A wraith in its most basic form is nothing more than a simple ghost. Really, that's what we're working with here. Sometimes they are seen as omens of death, so are ghosts, but they have been associated with the darker side, especially in the last century or so. Hollywood's made great strides for that. Wraiths are associated with shadow people as well, and there is some connection to that, but that's not always the case. Shadow people can be their own entire weird little group, and we'll look into those guys maybe, well, one of these days. Some wraiths, though, going back to what I said earlier, are benign altogether. These are excuse me. They're omens of death, but they don't perform anything that actually does it. They're more of like attracted to the ending of something, so they don't do anything. They just kind of float out there and watch, which is odd in its own little world. But there's also a belief that they sense the bad stuff coming, and their presence is a warning to you, letting you know that something's happening. You can adjust and see if you can fix it, or at least they're there observing it go down. Most people see them as evil for this type of practice, but it's no different than getting the news about something happening, like someone, oh, look out, there's fill in the blank going on, and you're like, whatever, and then it happens, you're like, oh, how dare that? Same concept. The other part that I saw when I was going through it, reading about some of their more benign aspects, they're kind of the delivery person. They deliver the news. Just like when we see the Grim Reaper and everyone assumes the Grim Reaper is evil, the Grim Reaper is only there to escort the soul into the afterlife. They're not the ones doing the reaping, they're collecting. So they're not actually as evil as people think, and that's the way it is with the Wraiths. Especially in our, like I said, our more modern pop culture world, they've taken a darker toll. But that's not historically accurate. On a more positive note, going back to the other branch that I talked about earlier, the Vorer can act as a watcher or a guardian over a person, still tying into that observing thing. Usually this type of wraith is formed when a family member many generations back crosses over, and instead of going into the light, decides to become a guardian. And they watch over the family as it expands, it grows. Being on the astral, they can move through time and space pretty easily, so it's not like they can only follow one person, they can follow the whole group. They preserve a family, and these are considered exceptionally positive wraiths. In the Old Norse lore, the Vor or the Vard are guardian spirits. They don't always follow a family line. Sometimes they follow a specific soul. So like this one soul pops into a body, the Vorer's there. And when the soul pops back out, the Vorer's there. Follows them to the next body. So it's not always a bloodline in that aspect, which again is kind of cool. But it follows that soul through its incarnations until it manifests its highest aspect, and then it's not needed anymore. These spirits can manifest as small lights. Sometimes they're images of the original person, kind of like as a guide, more so than a doppelganger aspect. And sometimes, but not always, they show up as the person they're protecting, and that's not always to the person that they're protecting. When they show up with the image of the protected, they're showing up that way to someone else to be like, dude, you've got to go save this person. This is the person you're looking for. And so they can actually be very beneficial in that aspect. Some say that, and some of the lore that's attached to the Vorer especially, says that they will show up before a person physically comes to visit you. So if you're expecting company and you get this tingling or an itching, specifically back of the neck, back of the ears, your nose is another spot that'll do it, before the person arrives, it's said that the Vorer is coming to make sure that it's safe for their guardian pupil to actually be there. So if you start paying attention to those type of signs and stuff before people show up, generally means there's someone checking out the place, making sure everything is good before their person wanders in. There is another version of the Vorer which is called a Revenant. And a Revenant is basically something that haunts a specific or protects a specific location or object. A Revenant is not attached to a person, doesn't usually interact with a person, but it is bound to a place or an item. A Revenant, non-demonic, can be, like when you have that lucky necklace that Great Aunt Bessie gave you. There could be a Revenant attached to that. When you walk into a place and you just kind of have that weird pins and needles feeling, but it's not evil, it's just there, that can be a Revenant. Houses are notorious for having Revenants roaming about. Doesn't mean evil, just means that there's a spirit roaming around. And just FYI, what we can see here is like this much of the actual spectrum, so who knows really what's around us at any given moment. In some areas, in the Norse myths specifically, there were trees that were considered the residence of the Vorer or the guardian, making a tree the warden tree. So if there's an old tree on your property, might be interesting to check it out, and who knows, you might meet a dryad if you don't meet a Vorer. Those kind of spirits tend to be very gentle, and they want to take care of the people that are willing to communicate and be respectful to them as well. So, do Wraiths still exist? I personally think that they do. And so does pop culture. The ring Wraiths in the Lord of the Rings series of books are some of the more well-known. The Nazgul, at least I personally think they are. But they took the darker road. They were the mortal men, the 9 kings who gave up their souls for dark power. Ties into the darker aspects of lore, casting spells that backfire, and they're, well, now you answer to the Dark Lord. They tend to appear also in their darker forms in the Dungeons and Dragons game. Of course, they collect everybody, so why wouldn't they be there? And as I was digging through this, I have not read or played these games, but they play a fairly prominent as part in the Warhammer games and books. Didn't know that. So I'm not exactly sure how they play the role, if they're dark or light or neutral, but they do show up in that realm as well. They show up in the Apex Legends games and Dead by Daylight. A lot of the games that are a little bit on the darker aspect, you could call them the horror video games. But the Wraith concept also shows up in one of my probably absolute favorite series of books of all time, especially the Sword and Sorcery kind, which is the original Dragonlance textbooks. Not quite. Novels. They are definitely on the darker side in that book, in that set of books. And I don't remember if it's the first or the second one. I linked the first trilogy in the description. But there is a wizard, he's a neutral wizard, so to speak, named Raistlin, and he works with Wraiths to communicate messages in those books. I think it's the first one specifically. And it scares everybody because the Wraiths in this world are lethal. If you touch them, communicating with them is deadly. But he is able to do it because he's a wizard, on their magic and all that fun stuff. But it is definitely an interesting aspect, but they tend to play darker roles in these books because that's kind of what people are looking for when they're writing these stories. Overall, Wraiths have been demonized through history, especially the last little while, and people have tried to forget about them. Let's be honest here, you're not forgetting something like this. They're not going anywhere. They're not all evil, as we went through today. Some are actually quite beneficial. religion and pop culture, for some strange reason, and I'm not honestly sure why both of them do this, want to point to the dark side. They don't want to admit that there might be something more positive with these creatures, because they kind of are more neutral than we've been led to believe in a lot of ways. So for their own purposes, I'm going to let you make your own judgment. Do you think that they are positive? Do you think they're negative? Do you think that they never existed in the first place? Oops, move that. What do you think about them for the... sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once. What do you think, honestly? Have you had encounters with something that could be classified as a wraith? You know, a revenant, you know, a charm, a house that has a spirit in it that it's not really a ghost, but it is type of a thing. You've seen that ghostly image walking along the edge of a forest, or passing through doorways, not so much shadow people exactly, but along those lines. If you had any experiences, drop them in the comments down below. I'm sure other people have had experiences. Whether they want to admit them or not is always the big question there, because you know, you don't always want to admit that you've seen something on the darker aspect of life, because, well, I don't want someone thinking I'm crazy. You're not. Just not everybody is... Not everybody's honest about what they see, or they don't want to acknowledge what they see. Maybe not so much an honesty thing, but it happens. So, trying to get all my stuff lined up here. I need bigger screen. With that, we will start to do a reading, and I am going to hold the intention of doing a reading for a neutral wraith. Not good, not evil, just kind of hanging out, doing their thing. Maybe a warden type wraith, the Voror, because the origins of the wraiths are very shrouded in mystery, much like their existence is today. They're not always evil. They're not always good. They are a lot like humans. You've got good ones, you've got bad ones, and you've got the in-betweens. These guys follow similar rules. According to most of the lore that I could find, they follow the similar rules as a human, because in 90% of the cases, they were human. They made mistakes in life, and they have been punished for said mistakes. Doesn't mean that they need to be punished for eternity. In some cases, I have no problem with that. In other cases, no. They don't deserve that. So, we're going to look from a neutral standpoint with this tarot reading. I'm using just the basic Celtic cross. It's a simple way to look at an overall environment, attitude, and ideology of a person or place, entity, etc. So that's why I choose to use that one. And I'm shuffling the deck, and I'm drawing the cards as we speak. That's kind of the reason I'm rambling here for a second. I don't like to pre-draw cards. That seems weird to me, especially when we're doing, live streams. But this is just to see what they have coming up. Interestingly enough, the tarot does not just work for one person. When you're doing a general reading, they tend to resonate for everybody. So if you hear something in here that inspires you, or tickles the back of your brain like it might be connected, then there might be a message for you too. Anyway, we're going to start with the significator. So this is where they are at in this moment. It is the Eight of Chalices. Whoops, I have to edit this picture real quick. Finger edit. The Eight of Chalices, so they're almost at the end of a cycle. But they're an eternal being, because an 8 is also the symbol of eternity. They're kind of tied emotionally. The energy that's coming up is they're not really sure where they fit in anymore. Which, considering what we've read today, the confusion is justified and understandable, because in some cases they were ripped out of their own forms, so they're just kind of floating in a gray space, and they don't really know what they're supposed to be doing or why they're there. So there's a little bit of confusion, even though They're at that precipice where you should be able to complete Summerland or the Underworld, but they're not allowed to move there. So they're kind of trapped in this emotional miasma. The thing that's crossing them is the Magician. They've had training. They have had tools. The problem is those tools have turned against him, because the thing that's crossing you is the obstacle, your challenge. In their aspect, it's this fact that they know that there's a way to fix the problem, and in their human form, the ones that were human, they would be able to fix this. But where they're at now, those tools have been bound from them. Even if they could physically access them, they're not allowed to use them. So what's crossing them is literally their tools, their knowledge, their abilities have been constricted and constrained. Their higher aspects is the Four of Pentacles. They're struggling. They're not really sure who's guiding who here. They want help. They just don't know how to ask for it. There is this sense of frailty, but also they literally play both people in this card, because there's this urge to control, but there's this frailty of mind and of ability. Like, they know that there's things they could be doing, but they're not really sure. So their higher self, higher frequency is saying, you know what? You've made your bed. They don't want to admit. They don't want to admit that they messed up. So they're looking for someone to show them the way. The problem is the person showing them the way is saying, you need to figure out what you did wrong. You need to apologize and clean this up. So even for the neutral wraiths, you have this push-pull where they feel weak, justified. They know that there's a way out, understandable, but they don't know how, leading to why they are the Eight of Chalices, kind of confusion, a little bit of frustration going on. So their lower self, their subconscious mind, so to speak, is the Temperance card. Ooh, wow. Okay, we're going to have to really edit. The Temperance card is showing that they have lost the balance. They didn't fill their own cup first, because if you look, she has a cup that she's filling, and then that's spilling over. And as their subconscious energy, they have forgotten how to do that. They were so busy hoarding and not sharing, abusing their gifts in the physical world, if we're talking the Magician and Witch version into spirit, that they lost connection with the outside world. It's saying that their imbalance, their lack of self-control and self-awareness led them to where they're at now. And so their subconscious, their root, is really kind of chastising them, and that's part of that punishment of being where they're at, is you did this to yourselves. What were you thinking? How dare you do something so stupid? You tried to adjust time, you tried to work on extending your life or cutting someone else's short, and it rebounded. You expected anything different. You were not doing things from a point of filling up or helping someone else, and so it's rebounded on you. And that's the negative aspect of the Temperance card, is you're, instead of doing something to benefit, you're actually harming, and that's where we ended up. So their immediate past, we're talking about semi-immortal beings here, so the last 100 years, is the Four of Swords, feeling lost. Their past is feeling confusion. Intellectually, they're not really sure what happened. Why did they end up being in this lost place? But their past is not showing any benefit. There's a vitality, meaning when they were still human, probably, that there is some health there. There was health. But they've lost it. They've lost that drive, that motivation, and so now they're wandering, a lost soul. So their immediate future, the next 100 years or so, is the Five of Wands. They are gazing into the future. They are trying to figure out where to go next. When you're lost in the ether, when you're lost in that gray mist of the abyss, so to speak, the astral plane, you can go anywhere. You can see anything, but it doesn't really fulfill you. It's a very, very blasé realm. The astral is literally just a transitional period. You're supposed to pass through it when your soul passes over. They get trapped there. So it's like being trapped in a place where you can see anything, know anything, do anything, but you have no emotional attachment to it. So it's very painfully blasé. So their future is not looking so great either. Sorry, Wraiths, but it's just how it's looking, dude. Their current attitude is the Seven of Swords. Again, we're going back to this intellectual, we're going back to the air energy. So you've got this energy of almost arrogance. Like, we did this. We knew what we were doing. We were able to wield this ability, especially the magicians. But it doesn't always work out so well. And so their arrogance was almost their downfall, but they still are clinging on to that aspect of, I have this ability. I can do this. I have knowledge. I have power. Yes, they do still have a lot of power, but just like some of the leech ones, you can't use it. So their attitude is they still control, they still have this, but the frustration is they can't quite use it yet. So their environment is, get it back over in the light, the One of Pentacles. So there is, oh, of course, just one second. There we go. There's new beginnings coming in. There's a possibility for them in their environment in this current sense to be able to manifest back into the physical, and it's not through the aspect of possession or something along those lines. Their environment is changing. So the astral, and this could be the fact that our planet itself and our energy fields as we're moving are shifting into higher frequencies. The wraiths that are just kind of there or have been protectors, this is saying there's a new beginning possible for them. So if they are protecting and they're ready to reincarnate, this is a time where that could be happening. Their environment is changing, and it's changing into allowing them more access and more knowledge and ability to step back into the world of the living. So their environment is actually shifting in a good way for them. Their hopes and fears is the Ten of Wands. They're scared of their own passions. They are on that cusp of, we've completed one cycle, but we're not really sure when the next cycle begins. But it's a lot of the fire that created them, the things that inspired them and led them into the path that ended up putting them where they were. It took a lot of heart and a lot of passion. The fear is, what if they come back in and they do it again? So there's that fear of, we want to take the next step. We want to work into that next level, possibly coming back into the physical form, freeing ourselves from this eternal wandering. But what if? What if game's really dangerous? But that's where they're at. That's their hopes, is we could, but their fear is, but if we do, are we going to be lost to those passions? Will we remember the lessons that we learned so that we don't go down that same path again? And if it's the Warden or the Voror, when they reincarnate, are they going to be able to access the knowledge, wisdom, and abilities they had when they were in the spirit realm, being able to protect, guide, and guard? Are they still going to be able to bring those through? I'm hearing in one aspect, yes, but that doesn't always play out in quite the way you would think. So, spirit world versus physical world, two different worlds. They interact, but not always according to a set rules. Their final outcome is the Seven of Pentacles. Their final outcome is really actually positive. It's saying that there's a time of celebration, a time of almost frivolity for them, where they're being freed from an aspect of their imprisonment. So does that mean they can move on to their heaven, summerland, positive afterlife? Possibly. The ones who've been more neutral, the guides, the Vorors and Vards and things like that, it's showing that they're moving into this more positive aspect. The neutral ones are being offered options and choices. The ones that are in the negative, you guys need to work on yourselves. So it's called being self-aware, and you need to work on that. But their overall energy going forward is actually fairly positive. There's a lot of good stuff in the future possibly for them. Again, it's where their souls are ready and aligned, or if they're soulless, it's been the actions that they have performed in their current existence that led them up or down. But there is an outlook that's looking more positive for the Wraiths. So, again, these were more for fun, just something to I like doing this kind of stuff because it's something fun, it's something relaxing. It's a little bit frivolous, but it also makes you think about things a little bit differently. Like, what would be the case if you were sitting in front of a Wraith? What would your tarot reading for them look like? And what kind of advice would you give them? Personally, if they were sitting in front of me, I would say your next steps, work on improving. It doesn't mean you have to do 10,000 great deeds in the next year. Instead of being a neutral, maybe find a reason to guard a person. Pick a soul that needs some help. Comfort them. Be with them. If you are a revenant and you're hanging out in a place, clean it up. Make it look nice. Help the person who's living there, improve their life. Maybe invite a brownie in to help clean up the place a little bit more. And if you're on the darker side of things, find a hobby, dude. It's not necessary to always be trying to hurt other people. That's how you ended up where you're at. You want to improve? Find something that's more beneficial. And if that means going to track down the closest angel and be like, how can I fix this? Then do so. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Again, if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. Comment below, have you ever had an experience with a Wraith or a Revenant? If you feel comfortable, drop your ideas underneath down there. And with that, I will let you go. Have a great rest of your